If you want to consider getting into crossbow hunting and you don't want to spend a lot of money, check out this Killer Instinct X-Bow Hero 380. It's a very inexpensive crossbow. It's only about $200, and that's the whole package. That's the crossbow, some bolts, and a quiver. It's ready to go. You have to just do a tiny bit of assembly, which we'll do all that here in just a second. Let's get it out of the box and start checking. Here are the limbs. There's a bag of parts. Here's the actual crossbow. Here is the scope. Just a very basic crossbow scope. And here's the quiver with 3 bolts. This grip here is just a tiny bit loose, no big deal. Okay, that piece is nice and snug now. Foot stirrup. Cocking rope, which we'll get to later. Bag of wrenches. Some string wax, some field tips, sling swivel studs. Okay, during assembly, there's a post here on the stock that's going to index into this hole here. And the instructions are saying to leave this yellow label on until after you get it all assembled. You may actually have to pry it just a tiny bit with your fingers. Okay, there we go. Take out your main limb bolt here. All right, it's good and tight. Now let's remove this tag. Comes out pretty easy. Now it's time to put the foot stirrup on. You're gonna have these 3 little bolts here in the kit. You can see the foot stirrup here has these little notches cut out. They'll index right here, so when you put the bolts in, the bolts will actually go down into these recesses and make a very secure connection. I'm gonna put a dab of semi-permanent Loctite on these. Use your supplied Allen key. Okay, here's your quiver connection piece here, and it simply just has an attachment here that'll connect to this Picatinny rail here. So you have to decide which side do you want it on. Since I'm going to be supporting it with my left hand, I don't want the quiver here bumping into this while I hold it. So I'm going to put it on this side here. Just use the tools that came with the kit. Tighten it down. Okay, so when you want to install the quiver, make sure the lever is in the up position. This will be down. This is up. Slides on very nicely. Now it's secure. It's time to install the scope. When you're installing on a Picatinny rail, you're going to have your scope rings, and the bolt's going to run through here. So these bolts have to index in between these slots. Sometimes these rings are not at the proper spacing where the bolts will line up perfectly. So you can see if I get this bolt lined up here, I'm not in a slot there. So now I've got to do a little bit of adjusting on the scope rings so they'll line up properly. Okay, so now I've got these properly spaced. All right, I know I've got the scope in the forwardmost position. I've looked through here. I've got the crosshairs aligned properly. I'm gonna tighten these down, make sure all this is tight. Okay, we got the bow all set up. It's ready to go. Scope's mounted. Got the proper spacing on the rings for the Picatinny rail. We've got our quiver mount bracket set up. Everything's ready to go. Its widest point to its widest point is 22 inches. When it's cocked, it's about 19.5 inches. The length of this, including the foot stirrup, it's going to be about 34.5 inches. We put the quiver on the bow. We're looking right at 7.5 pounds. Okay, let's do a cocking cycle here. Put your foot in the stirrup. Make sure your hooks are facing towards you. There's a nice ridge right here. That's where the cocking string goes. It's actually really easy to pull. Okay, the kit comes with these arrows. They're 20 inches long, 370 grains with a 100 grain field tip. Would I recommend this $200 crossbow? Absolutely. You know, for $200, you're getting a very basic, complete setup. You can have this bow ready to test fire in 30 minutes, and just with a few shots, you'll be shooting it very accurately. The scope came pretty well sighted in for around 20 to 30 yards, and then you have to figure out exactly how the hash lines correspond to different yardages for yourself, but that'll just take a little bit of practice. You can see the last 3 shots that I took, those were at 50 yards, and 2 of the arrows are basically touching. Those were the only 3 shots I took at 50 yards. So with just a little bit of practice with this, it wouldn't take long before you would be shooting some really good groups, because I was shooting some pretty good groups anyway. The only thing that I would possibly do is upgrade the scope. You could do that for not a lot of money. I'll leave a link in the description for a scope that I would recommend that I actually use on one of my current crossbows. It's just a nice, very durable composite stock material. If you want to try a very basic crossbow, you don't want to break the bank, check out the Killer Instinct Hero 380.